Perfect. All right, well, for my professors, this is Emily Williams. Emily, can you just briefly tell me tell us your job title and your kind of description of what you do at camp?
Oh man, yes. So I am the director of programming at Disciples Crossing, and my job description, everything Matt doesn't want to do is my job description. I get to write curriculum and figure out the direction that camping ministry is going at Disciples Crossing. I get to do all the fun paperwork, registration paperwork, background checks, ministry safe trainings, all that fun stuff, director training, counselor training. I get to plan new events and create new ministries for us to see if they work and if they don't, and helping bring in new business. I get to do the spiritual stuff. I also get to do some of the more secular stuff like outdoor education, which is a lot of fun, and getting to play both of those parts. It's a very exciting thing.
You just referenced both those sides, the kind of administrative role and secular role, and also the ministry side. So I kind of wanted to talk about that a little bit, of how you view your job as a ministry instead of just administrative or programmatic even.
Because I have been called versus hired, for me that's already a distinction. When I accepted the call here, the way they went about interviewing me and putting me through that process was different than if, like, for Matt Chandler's job. But also knowing that this is my ministry, that the way that I go about all of those pieces, the secular pieces, the actual ministerial pieces, and even the paperwork, right? The administrative stuff, when I go about it, knowing that I'm doing it for a specific purpose, right? I do the paperwork so that kids come to camp, so that kids are safe at camp, and that they can experience God in new ways, and in ways that are maybe not new, but a reminder of how much they are loved by God.
Are there any specific examples of any of those job aspects, things that you think are, I guess, are most rewarding for you on a ministerial level, where you really feel like you're doing profound ministry? I don't know. I mean, you talked about the paperwork in a way that was at least surprising to me, and how you view that in a ministry way. But I was wondering if there was any specifics, since you do so much.
Well, so I got a phone, something like sitting at my desk working on registrations, and get a phone call from a parent who grew up in a bad experience in church. Which many parents have. Many of us have grown up in bad experiences in church, and grew up in this bad experience, and called because she wants to send her son to camp with his friends who go to a disciples church, but was very concerned about what was going to be taught, and how her son would be talked to and expected to react. And to be able to have that conversation with her, and even hopefully giving her some healing in some of the stuff that happened, but also giving her hope for her child to have a faith that doesn't come with strings attached, right? So that's an example of that. To even then, things like doing background checks, they are tedious, right? It will get to the point where it's like, I am sick of typing in this information. I don't care about a social security number anymore. However, to be able to get those back and to say, hey, you know what? Our kids are going to be, as far as I can give them, safe at camp, in a situation where they are going to be well cared for, when some of them don't get that at home.
Sure. Cool. I want to talk a little bit about your calling. Have you always felt called to camping ministry?
No, but mainly because when I was starting to look at ministry, camping ministry wasn't a thing. I mean, even while I was in seminary, the role that is now at Disciples Crossing wasn't here. It didn't exist. I've been going to church camp since I was 6 weeks old, and I love everything that has to do with church camp. For my ordination, I got a cross that was made out of firewood from the church camp I grew up going to, and I knew it when I opened it up and I smelled it. I could tell the smell. That camp has always been an important part of my life. I wanted to be a children and youth pastor. One point I wanted to be a Navy chaplain, but not actually on on a battleship. I wanted to be with their families that were left behind at home. And so I played with those different things, and ended up God told me to to a senior pastorate, to a soul pastorate, which was slightly terrifying, and I ended up loving every minute of it. And my call here came at a time where things in my life were changing. My ministry was still great. It was in a good place, but it came at just the right time, that actually leaving church was the hardest thing I've ever done. And I never want to have to leave a congregation like that again, because it was so painful, because we were all brokenhearted.
Mm-hmm. Right. Because your ministry was going well.
Yeah.
So you felt called, you're going through that exploration, then you go to congregational ministry. How was that transition? I mean, you kind of just referenced it a little bit, but can you speak more about when you started to feel called to camping ministry, and then how that whole transition and process happened, and what were some of your processing tools in that transition time?
So I was ready for a change. There were parts about my congregational ministry that became work. Writing a sermon every week became work, which was devastating to me, because I love to preach. I love to preach. And so when that became work, when meeting with my ladies on Tuesday morning for Bible study, which I loved, became a chore, it's like it is time to start exploring what comes next. About maybe it's time, maybe this is God's way of saying, hey, there's something else out there. Let's start working on your papers. And so I did. I started working on that. And some things in my personal life changed. And just really looking for the next piece. And I expected it to be in children and youth ministry. I didn't want to go to another senior pastorate. I was sick of doing funerals, which you do when you're in a small congregation. You do a lot of funerals. And I got a phone call when I did. And I was sitting in a parking lot when I got this phone call about the position being open, and my heart stopped and then about burst through my chest, being like, oh my gosh, that could be a thing. That could be an actual thing, to do what I love, which is camp, to go to camp, to be at camp, and to do it from a position I've never done it before, and get to help create foundation and these spiritual moments for people that I remember having, that were built and created for me. And just feeling that call begin to take shape and to take form. And the stress and the worry of telling a congregation, of telling my parents, of how do I go interview? How do I do it without anybody knowing? How do I, like, all of that, that worry. I'm a 1 on the Enneagram. I'm a planner. I have to-do lists, and trying to figure out how that worked in was very hard. But knowing that it was the right thing, sitting my board president down and telling her, and sobbing through the whole thing, and sobbing through telling the second service on a Sunday morning, and having people ready to make phone calls to first service because I couldn't do it at both services. I wouldn't have made it. But just knowing that call came, and in my life, when I know that God has called me to something and I've gone the right direction, there's this feeling that happens that I cannot describe, except to say that is God saying, yeah, you're doing the right things, like this nudge going, yeah, keep
Right.
going. And so it was one of those, like, it was right.
Mm-hmm. So once you got into the position, how would you describe kind of the construction of your vocational identity in the role, and what, even at that time, was there even still some deconstruction of your role as like a congregational minister?
Definitely some deconstruction in terms of trying to figure out how, like, what does a week to week look like, right? In congregational ministry, it was like, you write a sermon, you teach Bible study, you do youth group, you have prayer group, you do these things, you preach on Sunday, you do worship on Sunday, you play the piano
Right.
You do all of these things, and then you do it all over again. Around here, those weeks are never the same. The closest you get to a week being the same is cinnamon rolls on the last day of camp. Because during summer there is no consistency whatsoever. Everything's different. Everything changes. My off season, no week, no day is the same as it was the day before. Even my Mondays are never the same as the Monday previous. So that change in a routine took some getting used to. There was definitely an overwhelming feeling of diving in and going, I have no idea what I am doing. And the position was still new. Tiff, who did the job before me, did a lot of building the job into a description, but it wasn't finished, right? There was still that aspect. Plus, I am a different minister than Tiff is.
Sure.
So this job I had to live into it and then grow in it, and knowing that you can't just go in and grow. You learn in seminary. Brian Field did a good job of teaching me that you don't move the piano in that first year, right? You've got to earn some change.
Yeah.
And so there wasn't even time to change things because you're still trying to breathe. As I started 3 weeks before summer camp started.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that. How it was that quick. Yeah.
So it was like absolute chaos. And I had ended a church. My dad was on sabbatical at the time. And so I went and spent 2 weeks in Panama on sabbatical with my dad, with my family, got home, preached to my dad's church one last time and left. Like there was there wasn't even like sitting still. There was no moving and getting settled in. It was like, oh no, I got in on Tuesday night and was in the office at 8:00 on Wednesday morning.
Yeah. So how long have you been there now? You're probably close to an anniversary right now, aren't you?
So yeah, next week, the 3rd, is my 3-year anniversary, but it's my 4th summer.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you talked a lot about the routine change and that being so difficult. What coping strategies did you turn to? Maybe resources from seminary, spiritual disciplines? Was there anything that helped you in transitioning? I mean, something as simple as a routine like that, a completely different style of working.
If you're not careful in the job that I do, especially in the summertime, it is easy to forget spiritual practice, to forget to stop and to be thankful, right? To stop and actually have a conversation with God. It's hard when you get up and you're instantly in the dining hall and you're talking to your staff and you're going about and there's no stopping. And so in the beginning, it was hard to figure out that balance. And then I got to the point where I have to force myself to get up just a little earlier. And sometimes it's impossible. Sometimes it's like, no, me having a spiritual life right now means me staying in bed, right? When you're not going to bed till 2 a.m., that's what you do. You stay in bed. But getting up that little moment earlier and getting my cup of coffee, and I like to pray in color. So taking my journal and my colors outside on my porch. I live on the water. I've got a beautiful view. And to stop and to take that moment to be thankful and to just spend some time with God in that peace of the morning before anybody else is awake, with my coffee, listening to the camp wake up. And just doing that. And even on mornings when there was not time to sit and have my coffee and to do those moments, to stop and look out my windows and be like, take a breath, this is the day that the Lord has made, and look at how beautiful this is, right? To stop and be thankful. And sometimes that's all you get to do.
Yeah.
Sometimes, Saturdays tend to be more of a holy day for us. In that time frame of camp leaving, at least for like Matt and myself, right? To be able to on a Saturday to lay in my hammock, and to just not sleep, but to lay in my hammock and to just enjoy being outside and doing those things.
You talked earlier about Brian Fales reference. I've heard him say that before of not moving the piano in that first year, and it sounds like your first year was a lot of chaos and just getting settled and finding those routines. After that first year was over and you had a summer under your belt, you had an off season under your belt. What were the first changes you started to make? How do you think you finished the position, as you said, how what Tiff crafted was almost incomplete? How did you make that your own and make the position itself even resemble your kind of vocational identity and
Yeah.
transition that way?
It didn't happen right away after that first camp, even in that first year. I mean, it has definitely been over the years. Going into this summer, I will tell you that I feel very good about where we are in terms of our camping ministry, in terms of quality people being at camp, but also in terms of our curriculum, what we are offering to our campers. So I've spent the last 2 years being very intentional about curriculum, finally getting it to a place where it feels good. So like I cannot wait for Cairo Camp to happen and for JYF to happen, because we have worked so hard on those two curriculums going into the summer. And how much we have worked on Niners and finding that balance in Niners of the excitement of God with that spiritual practice, right? That balance where it's not just melancholy and mellow, but the excitement of having a relationship with Jesus and something that is directly their own. So putting the people in place for that and watching them get excited and their passion show as they prepare for those camps, and doing things, thinking about things earlier. Right. Last week, I spent time working on Cairo Fall Retreat.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow.
Which at this point, this time last year, this time the year before that, and the year before that, it was like September, October, if I was lucky, that we were finally sit down and talk Cairo. But getting on that now, because these camps, that vision needing to connect and knowing that we're going back to something. So what needs to get changed, what needs to get played with, how do we take the evaluations? And our kids and our campers and staff, they all fill out evaluations at the end of every experience. And you better believe that I sit down and read every single one, that I've got databases full of that information. And I take that to, with our high schoolers, I take it to CYLS, I take it to planning retreats, and we talk about what kids liked, what they didn't, what they liked, what they didn't, what they said we still needed to work on, so that we can continue to get better, so that we are offering the best that we possibly can. Because as my high schoolers say, we may not have all of the high fancy stuff that Sky Ranch has, but we've got Jesus. And making sure that they know that, and that we've created a place for all of our children, youth, and adults to find a safe space to experience God.
I like that. I like that a lot. I want to transition a little bit to, I talked to you over email and told you that I wanted to talk about Spectrum Weekend.
Yeah.
And the reason I really wanted to talk to you about this is because it's something that has surprised me in my own vocational ministry, how passionate I've gotten, or just how much it's been relevant to me in my youth ministry. It's not something I see for my later vocational call in military chaplaincy, but how much I have had the opportunity to work with kids with special needs and on the autism spectrum as a volunteer, as a youth minister, just at camps. Got to where directors were putting kids in my small groups. And so I've been very interested in kind of watching a little bit from a distance of kind of how you've developed this program called Spectrum Weekend. And I was wondering if you could just kind of briefly talk about what that is and how that's come to be and how that's developed. And I'm sure I'll have more questions, but.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I started the job, one of the things that Matt Chandler wanted was to create this weekend, this retreat, this camp for kids on the spectrum and their families. And that comes from him having a nephew who's on the spectrum and experiencing that as an uncle and how that affected their family in very positive ways and also very hard ways and difficult ways, and what that meant. And so he had this dream and this passion for creating something, but that's not his job, right? He doesn't have the time, energy, any of that to create that, to make that happen. That's what he has me for. That's why he pays me the big bucks. So we started talking about it. I spent time sitting in his office and letting him tell me what his dream was. And so then I went 2 summers ago to, Christ Mount in the Black Mountains, because they do a summer-long autism camp. And I went out for their staff training and sat through all of their staff training, got to be in groups as we actually had like a group of 5 with one kid on the spectrum or one adult on the spectrum. And we got to take turns being the one-on-one person with these campers. And that was an incredible experience for me in terms of, okay, this is how you do these things. This is how you create a schedule. This is how you train a staff and create a staff, and what you do with your atypical campers, right? So even just the paperwork, when I've got families that register for Spectrum Weekend, I send them more paperwork to fill out on their atypical camper that's got all of the stuff that I could possibly need from them. In terms of how do their kids react? What are their triggers? What are their passions, right? What's that one thing I could say and it's going to get them to talk nonstop to me for 4 hours, right? And only stop because they have to go potty. But you get all that information from them. So I went to this training and we started working. We planned. We got a grant. We got a grant that fully funded our first Spectrum Weekend. So that we end up charging families, whether it's 2 people or whether it's 7 people, $150 for the family. And what that charge is it's buy-in. We end up putting it back into Spectrum so that there's a fund there. There's money there to help support the next year, to help pay for people. So it's a slow build, definitely a slow build. And so that first weekend came, and it was a Friday night to Sunday, like our normal retreats are. And my staff was incredible. I had some college age kids who were going into counseling. That was what they were going into school for. I had some special ed teachers. I had just some even of our counselors from summer camp that either had the time or they had what I was looking for, right? There was one specifically who's like, this one has to have a female staff person, right? So I found the right female staff person for that kid because our campers had a one-on-one person. Right. So building that staff, but then also building your regular staff, because their siblings come and their siblings are welcome to come, and you create program for them as well. And it ends up being more like JYF camp,
right?
In that sense, where parents are also there and they get a lot of time to just be by themselves. And the parents love that. We have a yoga instructor who comes out and does like 15 minutes with our atypical campers first thing in the morning, and then actually does an hour-long session with parents who want to. We have at times offered different, like, hey, you want to talk about getting a service dog? And so I had a family that had a service dog, and I spent like an hour talking to all the other parents about how the service dog had been effective in their home. But really what you find is that they just want to be together. Those parents who, for the first time, are sitting down with people who don't know what they're going through, but know what they're going through.
Yeah.
We let them go. They go out to dinner. One of the nights they go out to dinner, and we keep all the kids, and they know that their kids are safe and well taken care of. They also know that they're close by if something happens, and we will call them. But they can go have a nice dinner, and we pay for it. And so just giving them that respite care is incredible. And so as that ministry has grown, seeing the couple of new families that have come in, and we were missing some this past year than we had the first year because of schedules, which will always happen. But you have families that come in that have never experienced something like this, that have never had that. Sorry. And just that to have the kids that have been here now for 2 years, we're going to have our third year this year, and watching the change in them, watching the difference the weekend the year before had made, right? And watching them grow, where at that point they show up and they've done that growing and they feel safe here and they love being here. It's like, oh, I've done my job. Oh, there's nothing else. Like, this is right.
Yeah.
And it feels really good. I have a family who one of the dads, the dad took a job, and sorry, it'll go to a voicemail soon. Dad took a job in South Dakota. Mom and the 3 kids, one on the spectrum and the other 2 not, were still at home close to Houston because she was teaching, and they decided that was best for her to finish out the semester, the school year, whatever it was there. And he'd been in South Dakota. And he flew in for this weekend. And so they got to camp and they were together. And that first night in worship, their son, who's on the spectrum, is singing Reckless Love, like at the top of his lungs. And not only were they all in tears, but the entire room was in tears. And it's moments like that. It's moments of just watching these kids get to do the things that they love in a different place, but enjoy doing them. That's very rewarding for parents to just wish that we could do this every week for them. And us want to be able to do that every week for them. So as that grows, it's fun to watch that and fun to watch everything, right? And just that's fun. That makes it feels good.
Yeah.
But it also, that ministry has made us as a camp more aware for in our paperwork, right? When I see someone's on the spectrum and paperwork, I can now get more information. I can call a mother and be like, hey, first of all, like I've got one that came to Cairo retreat for the first time as an 8th grader to midwinter. And I called his mom and I was like, hey, I'm so excited he's coming. Are you interested? Like, would it be helpful if I got him a one-on-one to have that weekend? And she's like, is that an option? I said, absolutely, that's an option. I will find him someone. Right. And the impactfulness that made, that now he's going to be at camp this summer. And we ended up applying for a grant from NBA and got a sensory room, a fully furnished functioning sensory room from NBA. I have not bought all the things yet and finished that room up, but it's very exciting to see those things and to have those options.
I do want to ask you about the sensory room later, but I wanted to kind of go back a little bit. You were talking about a lot of the programming for the siblings and the parents, and just wanted you to kind of expand a little bit more on how important it is to the ministry of that retreat to have that it's not just for, that all the programming isn't just there for the kids on the spectrum, and how important it is to the ministry, to those kids, to have programming for their parents and siblings, like how that the stuff not for them still really dramatically impacts them, and how important that is.
So I will tell you that the spectrum kids that we've had so far could really care less what anybody else is doing. They're gonna, if anything, they're gonna want mom and dad with them, or mom with them, but they're gonna care less about what anybody else is doing, mainly because we have done such a good job of having things that they're going to want to do, but also giving them the freedom to not do them. Right? Their one-on-one knows, hey, if yoga is not working for them, you can leave. You do not have to go where the schedule says. It's just a guide, right? This is where you're supposed to be. If you show up, that's great. If you don't, whatever. But knowing that the parents, I think, love that there are specific things that have been designed and created for their children, both their children on the spectrum and their kids not. And so to get to create the curriculum for the siblings, and trying to find things that they may not get to do at home, right? One of the things that the sibling group does that the atypical group does not do is energizers, right? Because they're loud and they're obnoxious and they love it.
Right.
Most of these siblings at this point in that group we've had are younger, right? You're talking elementary school age kids. So they still have that excitement and that joy and energizers, and that's fun for them. And while they're doing those, the atypical kids are doing yoga because it's quiet and it's moving their body, and they like that kind of play with some spatial stuff. And that's cool for them.
Yeah.
And parents, the first year I had a schedule, like a very, like, this is the schedule, these are the things, these are your options during this time. And this last year I was like, hey, yoga's going to be offered at 9:00. This is what time meals are. Otherwise they're pretty free. Now there are moments that our retreat becomes more like family camp. So during free time, parents are in charge of their children. Matt and we had a conversation, ended up leaving the pool and lake open through October till the middle of October, so that we had the water option for our spectrum kids. Most of them love water.
Right.
And so especially this last year, they got to be at the pool, they got to be in the lake, they got to be playing, they got to do those things, and the parents loved being able to do that with them. And to play like that. They like that time together. Parents are in charge at mealtime. Usually the one-on-one will sit with them. And sometimes like the kids will want to sit with their staff person or whoever and not with mom and dad, and that's okay. But mom and dad are in charge of making sure they get fed and to get them food. And that's okay. It's a different dining hall experience. It's very quiet. And my kitchen staff, or Carly's kitchen staff, knows that there's a good chance there's going to be a ton of food left, and that the only thing going to get eaten is goldfish crackers off the salad bar. And that's okay. And we just decide that's okay. But the programming for the parents, we've learned that less is more, and that is great. And to just provide the stuff, it is not as spiritually based as JYF camp might be or family camp might be, because for some of them, they just need to be with God in the place. And so that ends up being nice. We have worship every night. But one of my spectrum kids that's been there the last 2 years, who is a high schooler, he doesn't do the God thing. It's not his thing. But you know what? He comes to worship because his mother loves to go to God and loves to go to worship. So he goes. And he might say things, but it's okay. And he'll have a conversation with you about it because he's so smart. And that's fun. That's fun. And maybe that he's getting God in a different way than he's ever gotten God before.
So you kind of talked about the sensory room, the room, and how you got that grant. I guess I've seen an incomplete version of it the last time I was there.
Oh, for sure.
So I guess I was wondering how this room helps these kids not only at Spectrum Weekend, but how that it helps for the camp to be more inclusive to these kids, and what other things are kind of being done to help them be included at non-Spectrum Weekend camps.
So there are still challenges there. I will tell you, there are definitely still challenges there, because you're not going to stop CYF from doing energizers. You're not going to stop JYF from doing energizers. So the best thing to do for most of your spectrum kids, not all of them, but for most of them, is to get them outside.
Sure.
But to create, knowing, let's say going into JYF camp, I know that I've got a kid on the spectrum coming, right? And I will, here in the next week, it's on my to-do list for next week, is I will be going through all the paperwork and making sure and seeing who I've got on the spectrum and what, and sending more paperwork out to those parents. The same kind of stuff I'm sending for Spectrum Weekend, so that I've got some of that information, so that, hey, if this is one that's going to need a one-on-one, who do we have that's an option for that possibly? Or those different options there, knowing that going into a week of camp, how amazing would it be for you as a counselor to know, hey, Johnny has a real light sensitivity, right? So maybe we figure out how to make sure he's in the room that's got the darkening shades in it, so that that's good when you're in small group, right? Or to make sure maybe we find him a really fun pair of Disciples Crossing sunglasses that he gets to wear outside. But having created those steps so that they are having the best experience that we can offer for them, at the same time without lessening everybody else's experience, right? So that everybody's getting a positive experience. The sensory room, which will be finished before summer camp starts, will be an option for those kids that are overstimulated, that need to go and get away. And it will have options for all of the different sensory needs, from the weighted blanket that we have, to the swing, to the different lights, and the busy boards, and all of that sort of stuff that we will have for them as options. But again, there are limits, right? We are limited because if you've got someone who's doing Chiro or Niners on creative camp that has that need, we don't have a sensory room over there.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right. And at what point does moving them from creative camp and busing them back over the main camp still helpful? It may be, it may not be. So figuring out how some of those things that we already had in the sensory room that could get moved over to creative camp, not that there's a space there, but figuring out a space, even if it's like makeshift, spur of the moment, hey, so-and-so needs to bounce, and get him on the yoga ball and just let him bounce, right?
Right.
That got thrown into the director's cabin. And figuring out how we create space. But it's a challenge, and it's one of those that we are slowly working on. And as we create new buildings, as we grow, which we are in the process of doing, which is so exciting, that those are things in my head, right? Like, Matt and Jerry are definitely going to have different opinions about what comes next, but it's like, no, I want another sensory room, or I want a Lego room specifically for the Legos, those sorts of things, for the ministries that we're doing. But what's exciting is that the Spectrum Weekend led into the sensory room, which led into, like, Carly and I sitting down at Brownsboro Intermediate School last week to have a conversation, because we're going to do an outdoor ed day for their special ed class during START testing. And so being able, even in the training that I've had and the training that Carly's had, and us putting those gifts together, being able to create an outdoor ed experience here on holy ground that are going to speak to those kids. And that some of them are on the spectrum and some of them are not, right? And just being able, and it's like, oh man, this is going to be the best outdoor ed we've ever done. This is going to be fun for us.
Yeah. Yeah.
And knowing that we're not going to make any money on it, but it's ministry that is worth it. It's something that's good for us to do.
I want to be sensitive of your time. How much longer do I have?
About 10 minutes before I need to go get boys. Yeah.
Okay. So I was wondering, what kind of lessons do you think congregations or other ministry settings could learn from y'all's experience developing the Spectrum Weekend and developing these tools that you were just talking about for inclusion into other camps to better include these kids and adults on the spectrum and their families in congregations and in those settings?
I would say to ask people smarter than you, and to always know that there's always somebody smarter than you on everything. Right? Einstein would tell you that there were still people smarter than he was out there. He would have had his role models and his heroes. So finding those people that are smarter than you and asking the questions. Finding the people in your congregation who have experiences that maybe you haven't tapped into yet. Or people in your congregations who know people that have had those experiences. Talking to, especially when you're talking spectrum kids and you're talking those families, and knowing church is very hard for them. It's very hard for them. It's hard for them to get kids in the car to get to church, let alone church not being conducive for their child. And so talking to those families about their needs, right? And asking those questions versus just assuming we know what those needs are. Because we don't, and we don't know. And every single child on the spectrum, youth, child, and adult on the spectrum, every single one is different. Not any of them are the same. And so knowing that you don't create a ministry that is a one size fits all. It's not black and white, it's full of color, all sorts of different colors. And that ends up being fun. It takes some work, it takes some legwork. But when you find those people, I've got a core group of staff for our Spectrum Weekend that have come out of the woodwork. And for me, it's like, yes. And the people I hear about randomly when I'm out at something being like, well, so-and-so does this. And it's like, wait, what? No, I need them. I need them to come and do this thing. Just different people who have those gifts and abilities, or they did it 20 years ago and haven't tapped back into it for whatever reason, and finding those people, but to ask the questions and to continue to ask questions in your community and in those families that may be needing things, or if your church doesn't have anybody but you're looking to tap into that ministry, to go where those families are, to go and find those parents that are at their wits' end and exhausted, and ask them what they need. And knowing that their involvement in church may not be being on every single board and committee that there is, because they are doing their best just to get through the day. And that's sometimes that's what we're called to do, is to let people not be involved in everything.
Yeah. So I have another question kind of along the same vein, just slightly different. Of what lessons do you think congregations and even Disciples Crossing can take from this experience to be more inclusive and better in accepting and creating spaces for other populations that may not be included, not just Spectrum, but lots of different populations that they might want to tap into or be more inclusive to?
So I think finding the resources available to you. I will say, yesterday I spent all day at FCC Plano going through teen mental health first aid. And that was incredibly emotionally exhausting, but also very rewarding, right? And a conversation to be able to walk into a situation and to de-escalate a situation like that, which for someone that's got mental health issues, someone that's got an anxiety disorder, depression disorder, or are bipolar or schizophrenic, any of those things, and being able to ask the questions that are going to create safe space for them. And so I think for a congregation, for Disciples Crossing, for us to ask, what is our purpose? Where are we headed? Who is next on our line to serve, right? Where's the need out there? Mark Bender, who is our board vice president, walked us through the Horizon tool And one of the things that you do in the Horizon tool is you figure out the needs, right? Where are the niches of needs in the community? In Athens, Texas, in the Disciples Church, in the church at large, where's the needs? So one of the needs that we addressed in that was that we have seen the need in Spectrum Ministry, right? So that's where we are at with that. So the next point is sitting down and saying, okay, so we've addressed that. We are addressing that. That's great. Where's the next need?
Mhm.
And never deciding that you're done. So
Mhm.
for a church and for us to never say, oh, that's it. We've taken care of all of them.
Mhm.
Because as we've hit all the needs, which you won't ever hit all the needs, but needs change.
Sure.
So Spectrum Ministry is going to look different in 10 years than it does right now. Ministry for LGBTQ, ministry for mental health issues, all of those will change from
Mhm.
year to year, if not 10 years to 10 years. So continuing to go back and look at things, but also for churches not to be scared to walk away from things, right? If they're not doing it well, or if it's had its season, let it die. Churches are really bad about holding on to things and not letting go of them. And I think that some of our, like your bigger churches, your non-denominational churches that are actually Baptist churches, right, are really good about that. They're
Mhm.
really good about trying new things, and if it doesn't work, letting it go,
Yeah. Right. Right.
which is amazing. And it's
Yeah.
probably why they thrive so well.
Right. 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 Um, yeah, I think part of my processing of this interview and hearing you kind of address these last two questions is um, with my own call thinking about inclusion of military families, and I kind of see a lot of similarities in the way that you might have one military member or veteran who has particular needs, but then their family members have different needs, but it's all still defined by this one experience.
Right.
Um, and so I think I'll do some processing of that. But you've kind of led me into my next question, and I think this will be my last question: is what do you think is kind of next for your ministry and vocation? How you think it might change over the next 5 years, the next 10 years, maybe with these new and developing needs? Like what do you think is next on your horizon, what you
Oh
might be
gosh.
transitioning to?
Yeah. Um, the next thing for me is to finish with curriculum, to finish getting the curriculum right in that sweet spot, so that instead of feeling like I have to rewrite it every year,
Mhm.
that it's at the point where Cairo, when they go to New Testament, it's the same curriculum of New Testament. We open it up every year to say, okay, hey, times have changed. What needs to change, if anything? And
Mhm.
say, oh no, it's perfect just the way it is. Don't touch it. Or hey, you know what? Let's revisit this one activity that we're doing when we talk about the life of Jesus.
Right. Okay.
So getting those things where we are not having to reinvent the wheel every year will
Mhm.
feel good. And I think going to the next level with our summer staff, and with our high schoolers, and encouraging them, especially as they get ready to graduate, and preparing them for what it means to be counselors.
Mhm.
I think that that's one of the things that we've done a really poor job of, is teaching our campers how to be counselors. Because a lot of times what happens is they just go into it and think they're still a camper.
Mhm.
And we haven't taught them how to get outside of themselves and taught them how to be counselors.
Mhm.
Um, we just assume. And so I think that that's the next step in the ministry, and to continue to grow as we grow. Looking at new camps, we've got a new camp that'll be coming out next summer that's still in the final dreaming phases of planning, and will get announced in August, which is exciting. But seeing those things and finding the need
Mhm.
in camp and going to that next place, and then figuring out how we use our space in our off season for different groups, from church groups to school groups, and getting more people here as a way to experience God, as a way to get away, and to use camp to create safe sanctuary. Um, so I think those are definitely next on my list. And depending on how long this takes, it could take me 5 years, it could take 10, who knows. And just to continue to do this job that I passionately love and expect to retire doing.
Wow.
So.
Well, thank you for your time. I know it's right before busy season, or you're probably kind of feeling it already. So I appreciate you.
Absolutely, my pleasure. And good luck with your stuff with this.
Thank you very much.
Your semester.
I finished my final class today.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Nice.
Well, I'll let you get the kids.
All right, sounds good. Thanks.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.